determination in itself will not be enough. It will never be enough. Why? Because the truly key factor in making progress towards holiness, towards Jesus, is that He, our risen brother and Lord, before we ever set out on the spiritual journey, He has been following us. My friends, what a privilege, what a joy it is to be here with you in these radiant days. I'm hugely grateful for the invitation that came to me from Monsignor John Armitage. I could never have imagined something like this, and it has blown me away, really. I'm enormously grateful to God and all of you. So, our theme, our subject for reflection this afternoon is this text from St. John's Gospel. Whoever follows me will not be walking in darkness, but will have the light of life. Just before that text, there is this shorter text, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not be walking in darkness, but will have the light of life. Light. As a small boy, I had the great good fortune of being born in a house right next to the sea on the east coast of Ireland. A cause of wonder for me at that time was the discovery that in the morning, when the sun began to rise above the ocean, the light of the sun would reach right across the water to where I was standing. What's more, if I chose to move to the left or the right and stand there, the light of the sun would continue to reach me. The light would appear, in effect, to be following my every movement. This experience is, of course, one I'm sure familiar to all of you. But to me, at that time, it seemed nothing less than a miracle. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not be walking in darkness. These are radiant words, words of enormous promise and encouragement, but words also of great challenge. For if you and I really want to be free of the darkness that oppresses us, this can happen only if we cling to Him, heart and soul, and begin to follow Him in all our thoughts and desires. This will involve, of necessity, great determination on our part. But determination in itself will not be enough. It will never be enough. Why? Because the truly key factor in making progress towards holiness, towards Jesus, is not that we are now trying to follow Jesus, vitally important though that is, but that He, our risen brother and Lord, before we ever set out on the spiritual journey, He has been following us, taking the initiative. This is love, we read in the first letter of John, not that we love God, but that He has first loved us. Accordingly, no matter how unworthy we may feel, God longs for us here and now to experience in living faith the warmth and radiance of that love, that light. In all the complexity and darkness of the world in which we live, He, the light of the world, has from the beginning been shining on us, on each one of us individually, just like the sun that was described earlier, whose light at morning is radiant on the waters. He, the Lord, has been following our every step, His eyes, His gaze, human and divine, alive with tenderness and compassion. before Philip called you, Jesus remarked to a man called Nathanael on one occasion, who had never up to that moment met Jesus. Before Philip called you, I was watching you under the fig tree. God knows us, each one of us, head to toe, inside and out. He is our Creator and Redeemer. He alone has the authority and gentleness to touch and heal the hidden places of our wounds and fears, of our hurts and longings. He knows how strong the temptation can be when we have been hurt in any way, for example, the temptation to become bitter, cold, unforgiving, especially when the hurt is deep. That's why he longs for us to stand in the healing warmth and radiance of his love. He calls to us. He seeks in every way possible to speak to our inmost hearts, just as he spoke to the two depressed disciples at Emmaus. Later, after the encounter, they would say, "Did not our hearts burn within us?" But Jesus, it's clear, had all the time been following them along the road. He had been watching them just as earlier he had been watching Nathanael. With that same attentive gaze, we can believe God is now turning his attention to us. He is calling to us. How will we respond? Will we find a way to answer the divine call and step out beyond the darkness, beyond the temptations, for example, to bitterness and self-pity? Someone I knew many years ago in Ireland comes to my mind. Why at this point? Because this man answered that call and answered it in a way I've never forgotten. This took place at a time of great suffering in his life. Jesse was his name. He came from a very rough, tough background. He had been a drug addict for years. But by the time I came to know him as a priest, he had turned his life around and had become a much-loved, respected figure in the local area. Every so often, he would ring me at the priory and come to confession. I could tell from the beginning that Jesse was a man who adored his wife. They lived in a small house 2 streets away from the office where he worked in the city. Unknown to him, however, and this was the tragedy, his wife had begun an affair with a young 22-year-old foreign student. Sad to say, when he was at work at the office, they would be meeting secretly at the house. Gradually, news of the affair became public knowledge in that part of the city. But Jesse, to his enormous shame and embarrassment, was one of the last people to be informed. As you can well imagine, he was stricken. I knew nothing about any of this until Jesse phoned me one day and surprised me with a question. "Father Paul, do you ever get up in the morning around 4 o'clock? I said, "Yes, sometimes." "So if I come next Thursday at 4, would you be waiting at the door?" I said, "Yes," not knowing what I was in for. And then he called off without explanation. On Thursday, he came in his car. We drove up into the hills. Along the way, he told me the story. At the end of it, he said, "I felt my life was over. I fell to the ground, begging God to help me. God answered, but not with words. Instead, within minutes, I felt an urge, a desire to go up into the hills and there find a place where I could see and could hear fresh water bursting out of the rocks and out of the earth. I needed that so badly because I had begun to feel that everything in my life had somehow been polluted. So, Father Paul, every day for the last 3 months, I've been driving up into the hills early in the morning. I would find a place exactly as I have described, and I would sit there and wait in the darkness until the sun rose. What happened then was extraordinary. It was a grace, he said, but it didn't happen all at once. It happened very, very slowly. I can't explain it, he said. Listening to the sound of the fresh water every day, and every day gazing at the sun rise in the darkness, as if rising for me alone, touched something deep in my soul and healed me. I have always wanted, Father Paul, to give something back to you, a gift of some kind. Well, this for me is a sacrament, a kind of sacrament, and it's a joy to share it with you. Against all expectation, with the healing light of the sun touching his heart, and with grace rising in his soul like fresh water, Jesse had found within himself a spring unfathomable, a source deep and strong enough to give him the help, the grace he needed to forgive his wife. The two of them, I'm delighted to report, have been united ever since, live in real harmony. Once the sun had risen, maybe an hour or so later, when Jesse and I had made our way down from the hills, we were fortunate to find a place for breakfast. And what a breakfast we had. What a celebration. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not be walking in darkness. The principal form of darkness from which Christ has come to rescue us is the darkness of sin. He has, of course, come not to condemn us, but rather to bring us out of darkness into light. The text I've just quoted from St. John's Gospel is preceded by the account of a woman taken in adultery. The darkness of sin on that occasion was manifest not only in the matter of adultery, but also, and more tellingly, as exposed by Jesus, revealed in the hidden, more disturbing darkness lurking in the hearts of the men who were accusing her. Jesus did not condemn the woman. No, on the contrary, he forgave her, just as Jesse learnt to forgive his wife. That compassionate gaze of Christ Jesus is at the heart of all Christian prayer. All our attempts to turn our minds and hearts to God and all the graces we might receive of contemplation are nothing other than a response to the God who has first turned his gaze on us, and with a tenderness and compassion impossible to grasp or to explain in human words. But what a consolation it is for us to know that, although right from the beginning, God has been fully aware of the many mistakes we would make in the future and of our countless fallings away from grace, that gaze of his has never for a moment been deflected. St. Catherine of Siena, profoundly moved on one occasion by the thought of this amazing kindness, she turns in an ecstasy of gratitude to God and exclaims, "O ineffable love, although in your light you saw all the evils that your creature would commit against your infinite goodness, you acted as if you did not see. Rather, you kept your eye on the beauty of your creature with whom you fell in love, as if you were crazy and drunk with love, and through love, you drew her out of yourself and gave her being. The text is remarkable, and one reason why it makes such a strong impact is because Catherine speaks here more like a poet than an abstract theologian, and she speaks with passion and with the authority of experience. That explains why Catherine is able to communicate so well the great and saving truths of Revelation. Catherine is an outstanding witness as well as a theologian. Her words, her deeds, aflame with the truth of what she has seen and heard and touched in the hidden hours of dedicated prayer and contemplation. When Catherine speaks of the attacks that come to us from the evil one, the word she uses most often is darkness. The aim of the devil, she explains, is to invade the mind with shadows, breeding as much confusion as possible and undermining the individual's sense of self-worth by either gross temptation or by whispered lies. The solution, as Catherine sees it, is without the least delay or hesitation to open our minds and hearts to the light of God's compassion. For that divine light, she explains, enters the soul, pours into the soul of the one who opens up to God. Catherine writes, "For the light stands at the soul's gate, and as soon as the gate is opened to it, the light enters, just like the sun that knocks at the shuttered window, and as soon as it is opened, comes into the house." And then she turns to God and says, "And then you, true Son, enter the soul and flood her with the light that is yourself. And once you have entered, what do, light of compassion, within the soul? You dispel the darkness and give her light. You draw her out of the dampness of selfish love and leave her the fire of your charity, your love. You make her heart free. You make her heart free. For in your light, she has come to know what great liberty you have given us by snatching us from the slavery to the devil. She closes her will to all darkness so that it loves nothing outside of you, but loves you above all things and everything in you according to your will, and wants only to follow you. Then, Catherine continues, then she is truly compassionate to herself. How striking is that? If you let the light of God's compassion flood your soul, when you feel you least deserve it, and you're inclined to turn with bitterness against yourself for the past, but if you let God take over, you learn to be compassionate to yourself. St. Therese of Lisieux says, I must learn to bear with myself and with all my faults and failings. Then she learns to be compassionate to herself, just as she is compassionate, and just as she is compassionate to herself, so she is to her neighbors, ready to give up her bodily life for the salvation of souls. In all things, she exercises compassion wisely, because she has seen how wisely you have worked all your mysteries within us. Often, my friends, we're inclined to think of the spiritual life as our searching for God, our thirst, our hunger for union with God. And that's true, and it's good. But far more important than our searching for God is God searching for us. God seeking to break into our lives. God thirsting with desire to hold and captivate our attention. For the truth of the matter is that the God whom we are seeking is a God who has truly first fallen in love with us. And not only has he come down to us in his word and taken flesh, he has also taken upon himself all our guilt and sin. He has indeed, we can say, fallen down to our humblest need. God is unbelievably tender-hearted in our regard and all-forgiving. This, however, does not mean that God is indifferent to the decisions we make or the way we live our lives. Though he is kindness itself, God never encourages us in our mediocrity. On the contrary, he urges us to be bold in the pursuit of virtue and to take risks for the sake of our neighbor and for the sake of the gospel. He knows all too well that even his nearest and most beloved disciples are capable on occasion of great failure and rank stupidity. Nevertheless, he says to them, as he says to us, "You are the light of the world." Jesus here is saying that to you and me, and we know how little we're worthy to be given such a compliment. You, he says, you are the light of the world. It's an extraordinary compliment, but it carries with it an enormous challenge. Sometimes we're inclined to think, and it's a mistake, that what we are most afraid of in life is the darkness within ourselves, our capacity for failure, our appalling weakness on occasion in the face of temptation. But what in fact most frightens us, and it's a strange and paradoxical fact, is not the perceived darkness within ourselves, but the light, the radiance. Not our capacity to do wrong, therefore, but our God-given capacity to do things which are truly great and which, by God's grace, will perhaps make a huge difference in the lives of other people. St. Gregory of Nyssa writes, "Oh, do not despise that which is admirable within you. In your own eyes you are a puny thing, but I would teach you that in reality you are something great. Realize what you are." So we have, all of us here, the capacity, the graced, remarkable capacity to be changed from being poor sinners into radiant, brave, and faithful disciples for Christ. But change is not easy, and that's why most often we don't want to be told about our great potential, much less about the call to holiness that it implies. As W.H. Auden, the poet, once memorably observed, we would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die. My privilege here with you this afternoon, my friends, is to offer a brief, humble reflection on Jesus, light of the world. It's an exercise in what in the Dominican tradition we call the holy preaching. But all of you, of course, in virtue of your Catholic faith and your baptism, all of you are called to be evangelists of the word. In St. John's Gospel, two of the most effective preachers are women. First, Mary of Magdala, who was the first to bring the good news to the disciples, and second, the Samaritan woman Jesus met at the well. Of the Samaritan, we are told in the text, many believed because of her testimony. Today, at a time of general unbelief, it is no easy task to witness to Christ and his gospel. Why is that? Because a gap has opened wide between contemporary culture and the Christian faith, at least in the West. This gap will impact on all believers who are holding fast to their faith in Christ. But its impact will be felt most especially by those among you here who are attempting to step courageously into that gap and against all the odds, find ways of bringing the miracle of the gospel to a new generation. Already I've spoken of the gap between contemporary culture and the Christian faith, but there is another gap about which I would now like to speak, a gap that presents a no less demanding challenge. What I have in mind here is that gap within ourselves, that place of longing, that ache for God, of which Augustine speaks. Our hearts are made for you, O God, and we are restless until we rest in you. Of the tasks facing those among us today called to be evangelists of the word, the first, most fundamental task is the call to go down to the root of our desire, to learn to pray, in other words, from our inmost heart. People sometimes think that prayer is an escape, but real prayer, for all its simplicity, is the most ruthless test of our sincerity. For it is there that we meet not only the living God, we meet also our true selves, an experience that is, on the one hand, greatly uplifting, but on the other, decidedly humbling. For it takes courage to stand still in the radiance of the divine scrutiny, exposed in all our human frailty and brokenness. But it is there, in the surprise and warmth of a beginning intimacy with God, it is there that the light and the fire have their source. The light of the knowledge of God and the fire of the grace of preaching. This morning at Mass, the reading that was read from Isaiah made such an impression on me because it stated so wonderfully well what I've been trying to communicate this afternoon. Here it is, chapter 60, a few lines. Arise, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes, look around. See and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you, and the wealth and the radiance shall come to you. Because of the halting, imperfect words I myself have been trying to use in this talk, in my attempt to describe the experience of prayer, it might begin to sound that this encounter with God is something that can only be experienced by great souls, by great contemplatives. But nothing could be further from the truth. Often, in fact, it is to those among us who are the most lowly, the most in need of help, the most desperate, that God comes closest in compassion and intimacy, lifting up with hope and joy the light of his countenance upon them. Take, for example, the encounter as reported in the Gospel between Jesus and the good thief. You remember the thief had cried out, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." In a sermon attributed for centuries to St. Augustine, the ancient author holds an imaginary dialogue with the thief. He was clearly puzzled that a mere thief and not one of the doctors of the law had been able to recognize the Lord in his agony. Had this man taken the trouble, perhaps, he asks, to study the Old Testament between your robberies? To this question, the thief replies, "No, I was a full-time robber." So how then was he able to recognize Jesus? The thief replies, "At a certain moment in my pain and isolation, I found Jesus looking at me, and in his look, I understood everything." At a certain moment in my pain and isolation, I found Jesus looking at me, and in his look I understood everything. In one brief second, all the weight of darkness in the heart of the thief was lifted, and that is exactly what Christ, the light of the world, desires to achieve for each one of us here. His light in us, like the light of the sun radiant on the waters when the sun rises, or like the light of the sun viewed from the top of a dark mountain, light from light overcoming the darkness. That is Christ's desire for us, and more than desire, his promise. Christ wants us here and now to enter with new confidence, with new joy into his wonderful light. He is calling us to follow him once and for all, and unafraid of the darkness within and without, to stand in his radiance. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not be walking in darkness, but will have the light of life.